catchment areas, habitat fragmentation and fire management.
Wow, a lot in just this little space. So what is maybe the main one, the main area of concern? Is there one in particular?
Do we rank them in the hierarchy?
Yeah, probably. Fire management?
Yeah, fire management would be an important one.
Yeah.
Well, what would actually be really interesting is if I gave you all different roles. If I said, you're scientists working for the pine plantation, you're working for the pineapple farms, you're working for the Department of Environment, and you would probably all have different, you would argue to answer that question. No, it's the fire reduction's most important. Or if I made some of you fisheries, you would probably have a different one again.
Well, actually, we may do that on Thursday.
We may?
In the lecture, I may decide we may do something like that, because it's a very impacting thing when you have to take on the role of another group that's not you're familiar with, as to what's the most important thing in an area like this.
So part of what we started talking about, someone asked, is this part of a bigger catchment?
Yeah.
And so we just started talking about catchment management groups and how that can be a way to bring together stakeholders that are interested in different aspects of this landscape and try and get them to get to know each other and to set goals together and make decisions together. So it's one of those, it's sort of a form of a multidisciplinary team. Okay, gather in economists and loggers, welcome back. They're all about to quit their degree and go into forestry now, is that right? Okay, just to catch the group up that just joined in, we just started talking a little bit about what is the science group, what was the question you put to them, Christine? What's the most significant impact?
Oh, so the lady over there just gave us the list of environmental issues, and I just said, what would you rank as the most important?
And so I just started messing with their minds a little bit and saying, well, if I gave them all roles of different stakeholders, they might argue about what's the most important scientific or environmental impact here. When we were talking about water quality testing, I was saying if I was the logging people and there was issue around water quality, I would be testing up near the pine plantations, up near the urban areas, as well as in my forestry blocks, because I don't want anyone blaming me for things that I'm not causing. The other thing that we started to talk about was catchment management groups, and that if we had all these different stakeholders, we might be able to bring them together periodically. Perhaps there's even a catchment management plan for this area where they look at all the land uses and they might be trying to meet particular goals or at least talk to each other about their different interests. It's a form of a multidisciplinary team in a very loose sense of the word. It's a way of governing landscapes like this. Okay, do the social people want to feedback some of their thoughts?
Do we? Somebody like to share a bit about what we talked about? One thing?
I'm going to ask your group to do the same. So
what was one of the issues that we talked about that impact people in this area?
That there's not a lot of hospitals or main places that people would want to go to, so they'd have to travel far.
Yes. So infrastructure lags behind the development, and because of the increased population that rapidly came into this area, they have to they are disadvantaged in some ways because they have to travel or they don't actually have things that exist. So you get a lot of people living in these areas, but the infrastructure for them is poor. For example, public transport here has a lot of issues around the fact that the motorway, for example, only is really one lane sometimes, a part of it. The railway line only has a one track part to it at the moment. Every time they go to get the next part so it can cross, there's no funding. There is also we talked about the idea that this is a region rather than a rural town with a core and a periphery area, and a region is different in the sense that it has little hamlets of people that live. So you have multiple hamlets, but no real identity as necessarily one particular centre to the region. So that impacts the way that people actually think about living here. Most of the people that I know that live in this area are these areas, it's around lifestyle, so the environment is a very key part of why they actually live here. But then integrated into that is trying to get a job and the economy. There's always struggles around building the economy and having unemployment.
Yeah, good. You just reminded me of one other thing specific to forestry, which has happened to farmers in this area as well, that have planted some trees at a small scale to harvest it, and they've had people move into the area because they love the environment and they want to be here, and then they find out that all the trees across the road that they like to look at are about to be harvested because it's actually a working landscape. And so you sometimes get social conflict around the fact that the farmer was always going to plant those, but now they have an aesthetic value, and they also, that can even translate into property values as well. So you have this sort of interesting, not interesting for the farmer, but interesting interaction. Does your group want to feedback some of what they were thinking about?
I'm sure they do.
We've all got notepads.
Yeah, that's right.
So we talked about the economics. First point that was raised was tourism. So even in this area there's a tourism benefit. This is a public use area. So people would come in here to look for koalas, bird watching. They'd also come through the little townships and utilise those areas, so there's a benefit for shops and fuel. But you get these areas used by off-roaders or dirt bikers. So that has an economic flow effect. Talked about the plantation. The purpose, or the economic generator, is the pine or the softwood production. So there's a number of levels. There's licensing, there's maintenance of the plantations during the 15 to 20 years that they're growing, and then you also have the harvesting and a lot of benefits there. There's downsides, which is the monoculture. There's also the prospect of diseases and insect infestations with the monoculture. And we were given examples from British Columbia, funnily enough. But sorry, one of the maintenance things was the fire reduction. So reducing the stock that's being grown in there to encourage future growth of the larger trees, but that also then reduces the fire risk. So there's that balance there. As part of the maintenance, you've also got the road access, you've got the road management, pest species management. So you've got the interfaces between the Melaleuca corridors and the pine plantation corridors. You've got to prevent, or they have a responsibility to prevent infestation into the Melaleuca. Runoff from the roads has to be managed. And then we started to talk about taxes, benefits, and how the decisions for use would be made. So which areas would be used for pine plantations, which areas would remain natural, and what would be the decisions would be based around.
Great. So there's so much in this, and some of you may pick this site for your field trip report. So one of the other things to note here is that there was brief mention of the dirt bike riding. So this area is state forest. Although these forestry blocks are leased out, and there's also other areas of state forest here, it's a form of protected area, but not as strictly based around conservation as a national park is. So there's a range of other uses that are allowed in these areas. And protected areas so they're not just about conservation, particularly once you start to look at some of the uses in a state forest where there's industry and dirt bike riding, four-wheel driving, a range of different activities going on. And yeah, it sounds like someone at least saw the YouTube clip that I put on of people dirt bike riding in this area. Don't mess with those people. They're very keen on their sport. I just want to end now by bringing it all together, thinking about this thing, cost-benefit analysis, that I mentioned earlier. If you were to do a cost-benefit analysis, broadly an economic analysis, not just on the forestry, you would go through all of those things and more that we talked about and trying to list them as to whether they're costs or benefits. You would find that some of them are complicated, some of them are costs and benefits, and you'd have to work out what's going on there. And you would have to put a dollar value on all of them. Can anyone think of something that might be a real challenge in terms of doing that? Think about the whole list of things we were talking about. Exactly, good. So that's one of the big criticisms of cost-benefit analysis. It is the stock standard analysis that's done. Any large project will ask for some sort of cost-benefit analysis. Perhaps you would have to declare a range of costs and benefits that you weren't able to put a dollar figure on, or perhaps you'd have to look at other ways to put a dollar figure on something like natural benefits. How might you put a dollar figure on some of the natural benefits associated with the natural biodiversity here, or functioning of the ecosystem? Any ideas? A few ideas at once, excellent. Yep. Ecosystem services, yep. So we could look at what the environment is doing for us for free that we might have to do otherwise. So we have we have a filtration, a buffering system here of any nutrient runoff, sediment. That has an economic value at the other end here in terms of the fisheries, in terms of other things like that. You could try and put a value on each koala, I guess, if you could link it to tourism and do it that way. But there's a whole range of other things that are difficult. Now there's another thing that we will introduce, I'll come back to in the tube. Sorry.
So some of the other ways of costing, best alternative use costs. So if you were a group that wanted to ensure that you're going to keep the Melaleuca forest, the best alternative use appears to be pine plantation. So what is the cost of establishing a pine plantation if you were a group trying to save an area and wanting to purchase that to put into a conservation zone? Another area is, or another cost method that's sometimes used is willingness to pay. So what would a group be willing to pay as a group of individuals, as a conservation group, to establish a conservation area? So that is really, you know, a more emotive or emotional feeling as it is tied into a real economic valuation.
And they use willingness to pay in part when you have to pay a fee to go into a national park or a state forest. They've usually done some sort of survey to work out how much will people be willing to pay to go in there. Then they use that to control how many people might go into that area. If they set it at a particular level, they can control the impact of visitors in this area. Do you want to give a quick overview on discount rates?
Net present value and discounting it in the future.
Should we do that on the bus?
Yeah,
maybe?
it's probably better. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's one other thing that I want you to think about. It's this thing called a discount rate. The cost-benefit analysis has to be done over the whole life of a project. So if we're talking about a 20-year crop here, we need to think about the whole life of the project and the costs and the benefits in each year. Okay. But there's a thing called a discount rate that we'll talk about on the bus, which is about the costs and the benefits later on. We need to think about them slightly differently than the costs and the benefits that might be incurred up front. There's really critical challenges with environmental and social impacts that come into play because of that, because some of the environmental impacts of this forestry block may not become apparent or may not occur until the last 5 years even of this cost-benefit analysis. And so We'll get our discount rates 101 on the bus on the way to the next spot, and I want you to think about that because that's critical for the final assessment that you'll do for this course, where you have to think about different ways of valuing things and where they might be stronger or weaker, and cost-benefit analysis has a number of critical challenges when it comes to measuring environmental impacts. Okay, do we woof whistle or just wave? Or